Hi, everyone. Welcome to the School of Architecture and Planning Fall 2021 lecture series. This is lecture number 2, and we have a very special treat for this lecture because we have really 4 lectures in one. And today we're going to hear from the recipients of the Middle Branch Fellowship. And these recipients are Morgan State graduate students of city planning, landscape architecture, and architecture, and they received a fellowship from a consortium of different organizations and firms that are working on remaking Baltimore's Middle Branch River. I'll just mention some of them are the South Baltimore Gateway Partnership, the firm Field Operations, Mahan Reichel, and I believe the Baybrook Alliance. So these students interned with these various Middle Branch partner offices over the summer. And as part of their internship experience, and it was paid, it's a nice experience for everyone, I think, they all also launched individual projects. So they had the opportunity to spend some of their time working on individual projects of their choosing around the Middle Branch. And that's what we'll see today. We'll see these projects, we'll get a sense of where they think the Middle Branch should go, and we'll experience a different kind of way to take in this series of waterfronts and the water itself. So we're going to have 4 presentations, and I'm going to allow the students to introduce themselves, tell something about themselves, and with what organization, tell us what organization they interned with over the summer. So are we ready? Are we ready? Who's first? I'm sorry. Was that Maura? Are you first? No.
I think so. All right, let me go ahead and share my.
Maura Rothgormley is going to be first. Thank you. Each is going to be about, I think, 20 minutes, within 15 to 20 minutes. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. If I start making flailing, that means I wrap it up, you know.
All right, thank you, Professor Campo. Let me go ahead. Oh, can you enable screen sharing? Looks like it's disabled.
Yes, hold on a second.
Okay, well, in the meantime, I will just say hello. I'm Maura Rothgormley, and I am a graduate student in the Master of Landscape Architecture program at Morgan State. I'm in my final year of studies, so I'll be graduating this coming May. And this summer, I interned with Field Operations as part of the Reimagine Middle Branch Fellowship. And hopefully you can see my screen. Yes, great. Let me go ahead and present. So I had the pleasure of interning with Field Operations this summer, both partially in person at their Philadelphia office and partially remotely walking around Baltimore, including all of, sorry, one moment. Including all of the parks in the study area park shed of the Middle Branch. So a lot of the work that I did with Field Operations was conducting this visual survey of just asking, how does it feel to walk around the Middle Branch of today? And as part of that, I conducted kind of a survey of all 30 parks in the park shed, looking at what are the programs and activities offered there? What are the basic amenities offered there? What special amenities, especially amenities that provide access to the water, are located there? And then I also looked at the urban fabric of the 19 neighborhoods that are in the Middle Branch study area. And so these are obviously really different and really diverse neighborhoods. And at the end of this process, this was like, honestly, a lot of time just walking around, looking at different neighborhoods. I had like thousands of pictures accumulated after this. And I just sort of asked myself, like, okay, well, what what did I learn by looking at all of these places, and what kind of shows up in common across all of these photos of what is really a diverse and distinct and eclectic part of the city. So as a way to try to answer that question, I created this section diagram or section drawing of some common features, and this can be read up and down or from right to left. So across all of those 30 parks, all of those almost 20 neighborhoods, you see connections with the water in almost every single one of them. You see a lot of pavement, a lot of hardscape. You see a predominance of turf. This is like kind of the defining feature of a lot of the parks. And the way that you know that they're maintained is that you see the grass getting cut. There's a lot of very distinct barriers and fences and obstacles to getting around. You see, I think, like just an amazing diversity of kinds of row houses. It's almost like row house is like a misleading term because it encompasses so many different things, almost a different typology for every block that you walk down. You see a lot of open sky, I think as a result of all of that pavement and turf. It's a lot of open skylines, a lot of open view sheds. And one thing that showed up in almost every neighborhood, even when I wasn't trying to take pictures of it, were the wheelabrator plant, which is our waste burning incinerator in South Baltimore, which is, both the reason why this is one of the most unhealthy air sheds in the entire country. But it's also a wayfinding device. It became like a way that I kind of found my way around. I'd be like, oh, there it is in the back of that photo. Like I know that I'm facing in this direction now. So for my independent research, I was really interested in the history of the Middle Branch as a part of the city where we've long put away things that we want to be kind of out of the way. It's a place where we've buried things. It's a place where we've kind of put things that we don't want to deal with. And so I was really interested in this as a place where burial and the process of burial has played a huge role in making the landscape and remaking the landscape. And burial exists on this, kind of very distinct spectrum from just being a very utilitarian thing that you can do. In the case of Baltimore's streams and shorelines, this is a map from 1935 of the original shorelines of Baltimore City, many of which are streams that we've buried and put underground, which is, like a very practical and utilitarian kind of burial, to the more sacred act of burying in a cemetery. So this is also part of the city where many cemeteries have been sited historically, both Mount Auburn Cemetery, which is the oldest African-American cemetery in the city, to the Baltimore Potter's Field, or the Baltimore Public Cemetery, or also called a Potter's Field, which was a burial ground for people who were unclaimed or unidentified. And this just kind of made me ask in what other ways the act of hiding and concealing and burying things has shaped the shores of the Middle Branch. So that question led me to identify a series of 11 different sites where burial has played a big role in shaping the landscape. And I won't go through each of these individually, but after thinking about those or kind of seeing them on a map, I asked myself, how do you visualize something that is buried? This is a difficult question for someone who is used to presenting work visually generally, is how do you look at and how do you see something that is buried or is no longer there? So I developed this series of kind of speculative section drawings for each of the 11 sites that I was interested in, starting with the earliest one, the First Nations Highway, which was a major kind of transportation route that crossed right at the mouth of the Gwynns Falls, where, if anyone knows where where one of the trash wheels is and the wheelabrator plant is, it's right near there. So for each of these sections I showed the topography as it exists now, with a line showing kind of the depth, and again, this is somewhat speculative, at which things are buried there, at which the story is buried there or concealed there. So then looking at Mount Auburn Cemetery and the Potter's Field that used to exist, but no longer does. Masonville, which was a railroad town, which then eventually got destroyed to make more space for the railroad at Masonville Cove. The Gwyn's Run stream, which was buried but is partially unburied in Carroll Park. Part of it is visible. So just going through some of these, and in some cases, it's not a physical act of burial, as in the case of Westport Park, which is where the Baltimore Black Sox, one of the city's Negro baseball leagues, played. This park wasn't physically buried, but it was built over and largely forgotten. It's an unmarked site today. Same with Maryland Baseball Park, another Baltimore Black Sox park. But in other cases, a physical burial does take place, as in the case of Westport Stadium, which was another baseball stadium and later a race car track that was built into an earthen bowl and physically got buried. The stadium, the bleachers, the field are still under there, under like 30 feet of dirt. So one site that I was especially interested in where burial played a big role is Masonville Cove, which, as I mentioned, was originally a residential community of about 50 houses of mostly railroad workers that then got torn down to make way for industry and became a shipbuilding and a ship unbuilding yard. And it got filled in with sediment, some of which got removed, and is now being remade again through the act of burying dredge. So this is a kind of series of drawings I created looking at how that shoreline of Masonville Cove has changed over time and how it has receded, how it has advanced, how things get taken away, and then in some cases replaced, and how in this case, the act of burial has really created a whole new landscape and much more land area than was there previously. So I did all of this research looking at these different 11 sites and how burial has played a role there. And I kind of, was thinking about what do I want to do with this information at the end of 10 weeks. I kind of wanted it to be in a form that that would live beyond me and live beyond like this short summer fellowship that I had. So what I did with it is I actually proposed a self-guided walking tour of these 11 sites. And I created a website that could be used to navigate that walking tour. So this is that website. It's called hiddenmiddlebranch.org. This is publicly accessible by anyone. And so for each of the 11 sites, I have a separate page. I'll just show you one of them quickly that includes images of what is on that site or what was on that site historically and some history about it. And I was really, aware of wanting to present this information, not just in my own voice. I'm a student, I am a visitor here. I'm certainly not an expert on these neighborhoods and these places. So I tried as much as possible to find and highlight the voices of people who are experts on these places, who were residents. So in this case, looking at the Potter's Field in Cherry Hill, which, let me go down to the map. So it's down behind where Carter G. Woodson Elementary School is now. It says Cherry Hill Middle School, which used to be there. So for this site, just looking at, some of the memories of people who remember it being a potter's field, who remember seeing bones being carried into the school of the basement as they exhumed the potter's field to make way for the school and for the first African-American planned residential community that was built there in the 40s and 50s. So this website is up online. Anyone can go look at it. I'm going to switch back to my presentation now. And, in making this, it was not lost on me, just the challenges of like, how do you walk through a landscape or a series of sites that are hidden? And, the first question of that being, how do you find something that's hidden? Some of these places were a bit of a search just for me to find a specific address or location for. So one thing that I did is when I did find the exact locations of things is I just added them to Google Maps. I didn't know this, maybe other people are more Google Maps savvy than me, but anyone can add a place to Google Maps. You can submit your request to add this place. In this case, I submitted the request to add former location of Westport Park baseball field. And Google will add it. So now anyone who searches for Westport Park baseball field will find, this fenced off field in Westport where the Baltimore Black Sox baseball team used to play. And in kind of compiling this into like a walking tour that people might actually do, I was thinking about what order would you visit these sites in? And so one way I thought of to order them would be from, kind of the oldest place or the place where the story is the oldest to the most recent. And when I kind of charted that out in Google Maps, I was like, oh, it'll take 10 and a half hours to walk all of that. So that seemed, maybe a little challenging for folks. So then I reordered the sites spatially just to try to find the shortest and kind of most logical distances between sites. And that took it down to a cool 4 hours and 50 minutes. So, obviously, not imagining that someone would walk all of this in one day, although I do think it is possible potentially for a brave cyclist to bike it in one day. But, I'm kind of imagining that people would do maybe a segment of this. You could do the strip from, Cherry Hill Park, where, this is a site where dredge has also been used to create land there, to Masonville Cove and back. You could do the route from Carroll Park, where Gwynn's Run Stream is buried, down to where the Wheelabrator plant is. Yeah, and of course, I then challenged myself to try to actually walk between these distances. And it's really difficult to. And I think this is one of the defining features of the Middle Branch, and part of the big project of reimagining the Middle Branch is how do we make this a place to get around, not just for cars. This is like me going out with a group of my friends, just because I'm a history nerd and I'm interested. But for someone who lives in this neighborhood, these are the barriers that you'll encounter just in the course of trying to go about your day and trying to get groceries or take your kids to school. If you don't have a car, which a third of people in Baltimore don't, and a larger proportion of people in these neighborhoods don't, it's really challenging. So on the website, I created this kind of suggested walking route of using areas where you should use caution and areas where you should use a lot of caution. There's a lot of places where you're crossing railroad tracks, you're crossing major roads. There's many places where, Google will tell you like this is the best, most direct route to walk as a pedestrian. But when you're there, you're like, am I really supposed to be walking here? There's often no shoulder. There's no space that really tells you that you're invited as to be a pedestrian here. So another question that I kind of had was, I looked at these 11 different sort of hidden sites or places where burial has played a big role. And these are just the 11 that I found as, a baby landscape architect in the course of this 10-week fellowship. And I'm certain that someone who has lived in Cherry Hill or Curtis Bay or Westport or Federal Hill all of their life would have a totally different set of hidden places or secret places. So this was kind of like the, if I had another 10 weeks part of this fellowship, is looking for ways to ask people to, potentially share, contribute their own stories, and build this out to a much bigger walking tour, multiple walking tours. And so I developed this series of postcards that could be given out at public meetings or community events, each of which has a photo of something that used to be and maybe still is, but maybe no longer exists, along with Shores of the Middle Branch, and then a question for people to kind of, fill in their own and send these back. And each of these postcards has a QR code that you can scan as well that takes you to the Hidden Middle Branch self-guided walking tour website. So hopefully, bringing in a much richer and more knowledgeable set of voices to share how the things that are hidden or concealed in their neighborhood shape what that place is today. This is the other set of those. And then finally, I just want to say thank you to the many people and organizations and individuals who gave me advice on this project and shared their own stories about the Middle Branch and helped me complete this fellowship. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I think we're going to go directly to the next presentation, or do we want to? Is that how we decided to do it? Professor McSherry, what do you think? We do them all, and then or do two, and then have some comments, and then do two more.
Well, folks may not be able to stay for the whole time. So maybe if there are some questions, add them to the chat, or if folks have to leave, maybe they want to ask a question now. How does that sound? And then we'll just, if it becomes quiet, all of a sudden we'll move on.
Okay, yeah, we'll take a couple of questions. We won't get into the major
right
conflicting issues, but we'll take some a question or comment. Anybody?
Maura, I'm curious how you think they're going to apply your investigation into the larger Middle Branch, project. Like, what were they trying to pull from your observations, or how do you think they're going to use it?
Yeah, I think that they were, I think especially with the visual survey that I conducted of the park shed and the neighborhoods, I think they were kind of looking for priority areas to work in, because this is such a massive area and it's really difficult, I think, to narrow it down to like, okay, what specific proposals are we going to make for what specific places? And there's a really like broad range of, kind of levels of quality and experience in the parks there. So I think they were trying to find like, where is TLC needed the most? Or, where is a total overhaul needed the most? And yeah, I hope that I was helpful in that respect of showing like, okay, you have, like beautiful facilities and a lot of access in places like Federal Hill Park or Latrobe Park. And then you go to like Ferry Bar Park, which is like this little toe sticking out on the edge of Port Covington, which could be like this amazing boat launch and waterfront, and, definitely like needs some help. So I don't know what specific areas they're planning to focus on, but I think also the, proposing a walking tour was sort of like a little bit of an intentionally provocative move on my part to show like so much of this is not walkable whatsoever. And like seeing the actual like on the ground experience of like, okay, I just tried to walk from Masonville Cove along Frank First Avenue to Westport, and here's the photos of me trying to do that. I think that did kind of help them see like, okay, like this is, here's some specific areas where, the pedestrian experience could really be improved. So yeah, we'll see. I'm interested to find out as well.
Thank you. That was definitely a takeaway. I definitely took away that you exposed how unwalkable that experience is. And I really hope that they, as you say, are priority, that they prioritize that experience. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Mara, I'll just say I think it was a really extraordinarily beautiful presentation. The stories behind landscape, and I think just the idea of kind of uncovering and unburying these buried sections was really provocative and very thought-provoking. So, so thank you for bringing that to all of our attention.
I hope the students that are here, and it's mostly students, look at this presentation and they pick up on this and make the most of their, whatever it is, whether it's an internship or a course project, to explore, to immerse yourself in landscape, to, be the project, live the project, twist it in ways that no one expects. That's what we all should be doing. And I think you did a great job, and it was beautifully rendered in your slides. We've been good at to have like a few minutes more to look, to contemplate, to see the boards and to contemplate them, because there's a lot of information there. And I know it's not just artifice, that there's actual analysis and thought that went into each one of them, but a beautiful presentation. And I do hope that field operations runs with some of those ideas that are embedded in this presentation. Certainly the walkability is something they should address. And you've done a great job of alerting them to that and maybe some of the problem spots.
Thank you. I'm just going to put the URL for the website in the chat here, because almost everything that was in my presentation and more is in that website, and definitely check it out if you're interested.
I snuck over there in the middle of your presentation. As soon as you mentioned it, I was like, wow, this is really great. I can look at this for longer. But it was too confusing after a while to see them both at the same time. But that's a great website. And thanks for doing that. And thanks for updating Google Maps for us.
Of course.
I'm going to go look for
Absolutely,
these things.
Yeah, that's hysterical.
Okay, so are we ready to move on to Andrew?
Yep.
Okay, Andrew Ree,
Hi.
please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew. I'm a master's of architecture student graduating next spring, or spring 2022. I worked this summer part-time with Mahan Raikol. They are the local landscape firm working on the project. So yeah, my project's, I'll just show you. I just want to preface that it was never supposed to exist in this form. It's supposed to be a little booklet that you fidget with and kind of like, I wanted to translate my nervous energy into like a booklet to allow people to like have some conversations about space and people and relationships. So my project developed by me going to areas in the Middle Branch and coming back and speaking with Mahan Raikol about my experiences there. They were designing the space from afar, so I felt like I was I was just observing and reporting back to them about my observations. I am not a writer or an illustrator, and like this is so vulnerable to like present it in this way, where it's just like hyper focused on these like little drawings and writings. But here we go. So in the beginning, I went around filming and taking pictures of spaces, but I was confronted by some people who asked me like, why am I filming? What am I taking pictures of? And since then, I really didn't think about how offensive my presence was and how kind of like aggressive that form of reconnaissance is. So I switched to kind of silent observations of just exploring and watching and thinking. So I'll read a little, and yeah. To reimagine Middle Branch, I had to get to know it as it is and as I am. My confidence is fake. I'm weighed down by a difficult year. I hope that's relatable. I can pretend to be brave, and that's pretty good too. I explored the Middle Branch on foot, by car, and by bike without expectations. I've come to understand my prejudice starts from the satellite image. I'm bound to place before I even land. I hope that's relatable too. So yeah, I think I did a lot of looking, or I still do a lot of looking on Google satellites, and like I really associate things before I even explore a place. So, and that's kind of what their design process was as well. Before the summer, I was told that they didn't even have a chance to explore the site by foot because of the year, because of lots of things. And yeah, I just wanted to really think about you know, the spaces a little more intimately. I also wanted it to be very much about summer 2021. I think we can all relate to coming off from a school year of being isolated and then kind of being really vulnerable outside. So yeah, just summer 2021. We started to come out of our homes where we actually brood eggs. Breeding seems so natural these days, resting brood phase. We were trying to figure out which layers protected us and which barriers isolated us. Under my mask, my mouth is numb. Limp lips can't make a silent smile anymore. How many words come out of the turned corners of a mouth? We're learning to speak with bigger gestures that used to be natural, like communicating with broken tongues. I realize there is no such thing as an ugly face. I'm just so happy to see in the round. All the details or what Kim's lost are still here. There's so much to see in a few seconds. Yeah, I just really think that the last year really made us kind of raw, and I thought it was just a good opportunity to rethink about how we are communicating with each other and how space kind of inspires or facilitates these sorts of interactions. This one's about the shade. The park has not a lot of shade. So the parts that are shady, I really just loved watching how people use certain benches or sit under shade. So yeah, friends eagerly gossiped in the shade. I recognized feigning disbelief to show solidarity. He covered his mouth to tell her he shouldn't say more. She laughed because he was too late. The tree created their living room. Their smiles faded as I approached on the path, postured to show that they see me coming. I felt bad seeing how my presence affected them. Understandable. That there's some really intimate spaces in the open, people just hanging out and gossiping, and it's really nice to see, especially after last year. This one is about they're like this mother-son who were taking Carrie out to sit on a bench and eat. And I really liked how they were navigating through the area without even looking up. Like the kid was on his phone, and like the idea that his feet knew the path without having to look at it made it obvious that they've done this before and they do this as an activity. So I guess just remembering that people have sorts of memories attached to the way they navigate, and everything is kind of like an individual relationship. And it also just reminded me a lot of my mom and kind of the cultural implications of like what you're eating and where you're eating. They brought out their own hot sauce, and my mom used to bring her own chili peppers in her purse and add it to like every meal. So we'd literally be eating like a burger with like hot peppers on it. But yeah, so okay. Also the heat and humidity, it's like this has this presence outside in summer next to the water. So yeah, this is just a little drawing, a little writing about it. I will send this to anyone if they want it. I don't want to read them all, but I think like, yeah, I can talk about it. Yeah, this is my nervous energy. This is about two fishermen, people fishing there. Spatially, I really like the way that they sat along the water on the rocks and used them as seats that kind of were fighting against the way that they wanted to interact, kind of like faceted in ways that are meant to not pull them together, but they orient themselves in order to make themselves comfortable. And everyone had their like feet wedged in between rocks to like anchor them down, which I like that how people adapted to using spaces that really aren't meant to be sat in. So yeah, importance of seating, yeah. The signs of breath. there are like no parking signs along the streets where people who are from there really ignored and park and fish because it's their space. They know what to do with it. They know how to be there. They know what's okay. And I really like the tension of like the no parking sign where I'm like, oh, you shouldn't park there, but I also know that you should park there and you can't park there. And it's like, I don't know, I miss that sort of spatial ownership of public space where like you just know the rules, the hidden rules of the space. Then parking lots, I observe people hang out in cars a lot and kind of create personal space within boundaries of a parking space. I also, I'll send this to you guys. I also participated in an urban community garden protest, which is very powerful and very nice to see. But basically, the environment does not help them. The sidewalks are not navigable. They had to move around streets to get around. And the city was trying to take away their land. They're growing a garden. I'm nervous. Okay, and basically I broke down into just doing some sketching and trying to communicate these little vignettes into little graphics. So that's it.
Give Andrew a round of applause. Thanks, Andrew. Getting two different takes, two different ways of engagement and ways to think about and engage with urban space. Does anyone have a comment or a question that they'd like to ask Andrew?
You just brought tears to my eyes. That's all I can say. It was really, really a moving presentation and so different from Mara's on so many levels, but you uncovered so many layers of a landscape that I think go unnoticed and untalked about, and how people use landscape in their own little way to kind of feel grounded, as you said, with the fishermen, or know it so well they don't even need to look at where they're walking. And it's an element of the land that I think is just really powerful. And I think that's something that came across so clearly last year, in the past 18 months or 20 months or whatever, is, a way of finding your own little space that made you feel very comfortable outside. And I think you just nailed that. And I think it was also really impressive that you started off taking photographs and you realized that made you uncomfortable, it made the other people uncomfortable. And so you kind of took a step back and regrouped and figured out a way to record in a much more personal way your findings and your takeaway of the space. So thank you.
I just want to add on to that. That's what I think was so beautiful about both presentations, Andrew. I agree. That makes me a little teary-eyed. Just the poetry and the artwork is very beautiful. But also with Mara, just the idea of bringing to light these like ordinary experiences that are but yet so important to the middle branch, and bringing those to light and getting these stories told. And I think that's really, really great.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I guess I have a question for you. And as I said when I saw it the first time, really beautiful work. I love the way you captured, as has been stated by the last two commenters, the informality of the hours of repose of our leisure time, and all of the little subtleties that you caught along with it is really wonderful. But I'm wondering how the firm, how Mahan Reichel, did you show this to them, and how have they received this and the greater body of work that you've done for them? And is there a way that they can?
Yeah, I think that a lot of my observations are kind of trite. Like, I think that these are things that are already incorporated into landscape design and thinking, that it's kind of removed from emotion. Like people, we know we need shade, we know we need to be comfortable, but there's also why, I think, is missing from the conversation, because some things are kind of prescriptive. So I think that I help them think about actual people and actual relationships that they will be forming by changing the scape. And I think that they were also interested because they had been digital and been designing from afar too, that they were excited to think about like real people. So I hope I helped. I mean, that's what I think happened. So I don't know.
When you said it the first time, designing spaces from afar, I wrote it down because I think that's, that's an easy, especially in our COVID era, that's an easy way, and probably how most work gets done, right? But we have got to maintain that connection to place, to culture, to people. Careful and iterative observations of places really can't, you can't replace them. You can't see it all from satellite photography, right? And you captured that in this very beautiful and in this stuff that would escape the analyses, right? So really wonderful. Thanks again. Any other comments before we go to the third presenter?
Yeah, I just want to say I actually wrote down that quote. My prejudice that you had. My prejudice starts from a satellite image I'm bound to place before I even land. I think that's just really important to remember as a practicing planner, and in all of our observations, that the prejudices that come from and how easy that is in the era of Zoom and having to do a lot more projects from afar.
To follow up on that, it's easy to excuse me, to think that you've been there and never with never having been there. He also Andrew also reminds us of the physicality of drawing. That looking at these images, these drawings, that the labor involved in making a drawing, it's so and that no lines are wasted, no lines are excessive, no lines are unnecessary, that each of the lines is purposeful, and when we draw digitally, it's effortless to make another line. But when you're using watercolor, when your paper is drying, the ink is drying. That it's a different consciousness about how you draw and make your marks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. We'll move on to Courtney Souvenir. Courtney, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody, or evening. I think we're about almost at that time. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Courtney Souvenir Jr. I do go by CJ. I am a 3+2 student here at Morgan State University, currently in my last year of the graduate architecture program, and I will be graduating in May 2022. During the summer, I had the amazing opportunity of interning with two separate firms, the first being field operations, just like Mara, and that capacity was a hybrid one where some days I would go to the office, some days I would work remotely, and the other firm that I worked with was Aceto Consulting, which is the consulting firm that was on the project of the South Baltimore Gateway Partnership. So this is an introduction here to the research that I went through this summer. And essentially, the goal of the Middle Branch, the Reimagined Middle Branch project, is to create a system of world-class parks and public amenities along the Middle Branch, and to essentially really serve the disenfranchised and undeserved communities that are along the area. My independent research revolved around the usage of public spaces along waterfronts in Washington, D.C., and to create a case study comparing two parks that are on the same exact body of water but are separated by just under a mile of distance and seeing how they differ severely. So the first park that I looked at is Anacostia Park in Washington, D.C. And this park is a fairly large park that is similar to the case studies here in the Middle Branch, and that the main issue that the Middle Branch Park deals with is that it is cut off from the community that it's supposed to serve by geographical barriers. In this case, however, the park is separated from the community by a Highway 295. So in these pictures, you can see some of that division and how that could potentially affect access to the space. The second park that I looked at was across the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C., called the Yards Park. This is a much newer development, one that is funded by both private and public dollars. So the amenities are nicer, quote unquote, there, and there's a lot more to do there. It's more programmatic. So to conduct my research, I did a number of qualitative and quantitative data collections in which I would interview people at these parks, as well as ask them simple questions such as, how did you get here today? What is your favorite part about this park? What is your experience like? And so on and so forth. And I turned that data into charts like this one here. So, for example, one of the questions that I asked people was a very basic one that introduced the project to the people I was asking, saying what's their name, their age, and their residing location. So, while visiting Anacostia Park, most of the people in that park were more so middle-aged or below. Nearly 3/4 of the population there was under the age of 50. While visiting the Yards Park, there was a much more balanced ratio of age demographics there. So at the Yards Park, that was more of a all ages are welcome type of environment that that park created. And the second question here was, how did you arrive at the park? So talking to people at Anacostia Park, over half of the people that I talked to drove there, and that can be attributed to the lack of public access that that park facilitates, as public transportation was the least likely answer that people gave. Meanwhile, in comparison to the Yards Park, which is just across the river, most people walked or jogged there or took public transportation. So this is here a map just to show how these parks are connected to their communities and divided at the same time. So this is the Middle Branch Park here shown in the green. The yellow overlay on the map is the Cherry Hill neighborhood, and the red stars are public transportation stations that are around the park. So you can see here that the public transportation spots are a little bit out of the way in comparison to the park. And the red thick line is what could be considered a vehicular barrier. So what separates Middle Branch Park from Cherry Hill is Waterview Avenue, and it is on a incline, so it's a bit of a geographical barrier as well. And there is only one point of access that is not even an official crosswalk of any sort. So you would have to, in order to access the park from Cherry Hill, you would have walked to the very northeastern corner of the neighborhood and informally cross a street where there is no traffic light or right of way for pedestrians to safely cross. Meanwhile, here, this is Anacostia Park in Washington, D.C. And as you can see, it has some similarities to Middle Branch Park in that you have a large vehicular barrier, except this time it is now a highway instead of just a single road, and that the public transportation stops are a distance away from the park. You also only have one pedestrian access that is connecting the park to the community there, and two vehicular access points that are at separate ends of the park. So access to this park is a little bit better than the Middle Branch Park, but it is still fairly more limited compared to the amount of residential space that is surrounding the park. The last park is the Yards Park, which is just across the river on the other side. And you should see here, residential areas are much more integrated. There is a closer radius of public transportation to the park. There's also a good amount of pedestrian and vehicular access to the park. and overall it is much more integrated and together. So now this is where some of the qualitative aspects of my research came in which I asked people what brought them here today. And these responses here are from a number of the parks. And this first response here is from Anacostia Park, in which this young woman said she would either skate at the skating rink or sit under the highway overpass that cuts through the park and just be present in time. Another individual at this park said he would come to fish on his days off at the park. A third individual at the Yards Park said he loves coming to the Navy Yard because he does not live far from it and that he knows when this area was something completely different. As I said, this area is a new development, so it used to be a landfill actually, so the area has gone through a lot of redevelopment and beautification. And the last person I talked to simply said he just lives there, so that's why he's there. So this is showing the different parks here. The top left corner is the Yards Park, how you have that quality of living right there at the park. The bottom left image is the second person I talked to as he set up a lawn chair under the shaded tree to fish along the river. And then the image on the right is the first response in which she would just meditate and do yoga under the highway overpass at Anacostia Park. So the fourth question that I ask people is, what is their favorite characteristic or amenity at the park? The first person who was doing the yoga really enjoys being by the water and having that nice breeze on them, as well as the fact that the Parks and Recreational Department of Washington, D.C., the National Park Service, they do have an office at this park, so they do a number of programs that revolve around the conservation efforts of the Anacostia River. The second person I talked to essentially said that he likes to people watch when he's fishing and essentially eye candy that he likes to watch while he's fishing. This person was also in the Air Force, so because he said otherwise, if it wasn't for that aspect of the environment, he would be fishing on his base, which is just down the Anacostia River. The third person that I talked to was at the Yards Park, and his favorite thing was not necessarily about the park itself, but more so the amenities that are around the park. As the restaurants there are very warm and welcoming, and that he does not feel the same amount of racial tension that he would feel in other areas of Washington, D.C., such as Georgetown, as he really felt that he more welcome and a part of the community here in the Yards Park. The fourth person also alluded to the restaurants being a key feature that they liked, as well as the water itself being an attracting feature. So the image on the left is showing one of the restaurants at the Yards Park, which is called Agua 301. The right is the sign for the Air Force base that the individual that I was talking about or interviewed was referring to. And the bottom right is a picture of the conservation efforts that the National Park Service undergoes by taking children on canoe rides along the river. The fifth question that I asked people was, what was one characteristic or amenity that could be improved to enhance the experience? One individual from Anacostia Park mentioned that she would like to see more community events. They do have an Anacostia Park Day once a year, but having more regular programming in the scheduled calendar would help improve the experience, as well as some small maintenance changes such as fixing the playing fields and courts. The second person from Anacostia Park had mentioned a self-policing type of method in which people would just clean up after themselves, it would be better. And he attributed it to the fact that he just felt that people don't care about the park. Like it's just there, it's not something that they necessarily cherish. So essentially also keeping the grass down too, as the grass is unruly in sections of this park. So maintenance issues were there as well that could help improve the experience. In a strong contrast, talking to an individual from the Yards Park, he would have liked to see more hotels there. So this is, again, alluding to the fact that people at this particular park are not necessarily having issues with the park itself, but instead would just want more extra things to come there. So this individual said he would have loved a 5-star hotel because sometimes he stays at hotels despite being a DC resident, and he believes that the implementation of a hotel by the park would help attract people from out of town to this park space as well. The fourth person would have liked a bigger and more traditional park space that kind of goes against the conventions of urban design now, and that green space is becoming less and less available. And that's something that he recognizes and acknowledges by saying that's how it goes nowadays. So after concluding these surveys, there were a couple of points that I found to be very critical, and that with Anacostia Park, one of the key things was a number of people visit to the park or travel to the park via their personal vehicle, and that could have been attributed due to the lack of pedestrian access as well as public transportation access. The second thing that I noticed was that a lot of the feedback regarding this park was tied to the physical condition more than things actually missing from the park. So simply improving the upkeep of this land would have helped improve the experience for a number of people. A third point that I noticed was that at the Yards Park, a number of the praise that that park received was not necessarily about the park itself, but more so the amenities that are surrounding the park. A fourth conclusion that I found was that at the Yards Park, the age demographics was much more balanced, and that could be attributed to the fact of its easy accessibility, whether it was through walking, public transportation, bicycling, jogging, or vehicular access. Overall, I really found it important to study these two particular parks because of their similarities to the Middle Branch focus area in Baltimore. With the Yards Park, I can compare that to the Port Covington area of Baltimore, as that is an underdevelopment a part of the city that's under development, and also has an amount of private dollars that are being invested in them, which can attribute to the high quality amenities that are planned to be there. Anacostia Park is very similar to a Middle Branch Park in that the residents who really live right next to it have a limited access to the park, as well as deal with non-exemplary conditions such as poor upkeep. This project is something that can be used as a case study for field operations and a city consulting, and learning how to interact with the members of these communities, seeing what they would like, and seeing how they can move forward. And that concludes my presentation.
Thanks, CJ. That was interesting. I guess I was going to ask you. I mean, you just got into it in the end because we're thinking about the Middle Branch. You've identified Port Covington as a potential to be like Yards Park. I think we can understand that why you come to that conclusion. But I'm just thinking from these two parks that you've studied in DC, you've noted the lack of access or the difficulty of getting to these places based trying to cross highways, say if you're not coming by car. What would be the one or two things, two aspects or design features or programming or administrative components that you would take from DC and graft them on not so much Port Covington, but maybe the Middle Branch Park and the waterfront and to the south of Port Covington, to the south and west?
Got you. So one thing that I really think could be brought here to Middle Branch Park is just improved accessibility. That alone would truly help that park become more enjoyable and a part of the community instead of next to the community. And as this diagram here shows, there is literally only one way to get to this park, despite the neighborhood being the size that it is. So whether it be as simple as just finding another access point from within the neighborhood, or simply even just adding a crosswalk on the street, that would really help improve the experience, as Waterview Avenue actually does not have a sidewalk on it. You have to walk along the grass in order to access the park. So that is one thing. The second thing would be, I would say programming is something that could be brought in from DC. So at the Yards Park in Washington, DC, there are a number of boating companies that actually allow people to rent boats there along the water. So having an initiative like that along the water would help as well. I think those are my two initiatives that would help.
Those are good answers. I just, one other follow-up on this, like, you know, you can't have a conversation about Baltimore public spaces without some discussion of public safety, right? And I'm wondering, is there, maybe you could just briefly comment on the public safety aspects in DC and in along this stretch of the Middle Branch, and if there's anything that we can learn about public safety, either through design or administrative practice, that would be applicable to this waterfront.
Definitely. With public safety, what I've noticed is in the Yards Park in Washington, D.C., it is very well lit. The walkways that access the park are lit as well. The walkways along the water are lit. So there is less of an uncertainty that you get while walking around there than something that you would get here at the Middle Branch Park. So just the simple feature of adding lighting and really emphasizing the walkways and delineating the walkways, as I said before, there's not even a sidewalk here. That alone would help people feel more safe accessing this space and being within this space.
CJ, this is Laurel. I had a couple of questions about that wonderful presentation, really very interesting responses, really fascinating to read and to hear you report on the responses from the folks that you spoke with. Two questions about the structure of the study. Was it up to you to determine the case study parks to look at, or was that something that you worked with? Was it field operations? And
it was completely up to me.
It was.
Yes, yes. So I live just outside of Washington, D.C. in Prince George's County. So I'm very familiar with the park space in Washington, D.C. So I saw that area as a perfect kind of case study because it has a lot of similarities to the Middle Branch area.
Yeah, I know both of these parks, particularly the Anacostia River Park. The second question was, is it the intention of the study to sort of triangulate, to ask those same questions to folks at Middle Branch, and sort of the clock ran out? Because I'm curious what the responses would be from the folks. And as actually a subset corollary to that question, particularly because the folks that you spoke to were by themselves. I was curious about whether or not the folks that you witnessed using the parks tended to be by themselves or tended to be in small groups or large groups, because based on some of the responses, you know, if some people like going to a park and being alone, they might not necessarily see the limited access as a problem, right? They kind of may like that because fewer people, I get to be alone, right? So anyhow, however you want to tackle those questions.
Definitely. If there was more time in this fellowship, that definitely would have been the next stage to definitely actually incorporate data from the Middle Branch Park. That was just a little bit difficult being with the time crunch that we had, as well as not being or living in Baltimore. So having to commute regularly, time was an issue. As for people being alone in the parks, more people were definitely alone that I talked to at the Anacostia Park. There were much more people in solitary recreational activities there. I feel like you asked one more thing. I was like, sorry.
No, I think that was pretty much it. I think that was it. The two, sort of whether or not the second piece or the third piece would be to direct those same set of questions to folks using Middle Branch, and then what you noticed about whether or not people were visiting in groups or individually. Really, again, really fascinating, and great job picking those two case study parks and writing those questions. You wrote those questions too on your own?
Yes, yes, I did. So those are questions that I just figured could really help create a database that could be of assistance to the internship that I was working with.
Yeah, good job. It takes a long time to write survey questions well.
Thank you.
Nice job, CJ. Thank you. So I think if there's no other questions, we'll move on to the last of the presentations. Is there any other questions or comments?
I had one comment that I really appreciated from the presentation, which was especially because we have this project coming up at the Cove, and the population is a neighborhood that's predominantly Black, and it's this idea of like, what would they like to do in the space? How do we create access for them within the space, or make that connection, basically. So it was interesting to hear the responses from that specific population and to see what they were doing in the park, the few that were in the park, and what they were doing in the park. And it can really probably help us think about what folks would do in the park that we have right now, because that's an issue.
Definitely. It was definitely interesting to kind of see it myself, like one of the things with Anacostia Park is the fact that that young lady was stationing herself on a blanket under the highway underpass really was striking to me, the fact that there's not necessarily a defined seating space. So she made one there is really just interesting to me.
Exactly. So thanks for that observation.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, CJ. Our last presentation will be by April Smith, who's a Master of City Planning student. April, the floor is yours.
Hey everyone. As Dr. Campbell stated, my name is April Smith, currently a city and regional planning master's student here, wrapping up my final class. So, hey, excited about that. For me this summer, I was able to work with two different firms. One was Aceto Consulting, along with CJ on some different work there. And then my independent research was actually with a firm called the Urban Studio, which really focused on their youth engagement initiatives for the Middle Branch project itself, which is where a lot of my efforts went for the summer. So does everybody see the screen that I'm sharing okay? All right, perfect. So the output of my work was actually a design lab assessment toolkit. One of the things that I really wanted to focus on was not only how do we engage youth, but how do we really assess our success when it comes to working with youth, one, but then two, the outcome of the various environmental justice initiatives and outcomes that we have. How do we know they're successful, and how do we make sure those measurements are in place throughout the duration of the program itself? So to talk a little bit about the design lab itself. So this toolkit is really set up in a way to help people who are either instructors or leaders within the program to be able to utilize throughout the time that they're there. So, and this is the kind of outcome that was there. So the design lab itself is actually a program or component of the Middle Branch project that focuses on engaging youth within the project itself. So they are able to come up with the different with projects, whether that's proposals or whatever their idea is, really, they can come up with it, and using design thinking as a way to kind of walk them through the process of putting different things in place. And so they can come up with prototypes, they can come up with just various proposals, they can come up with whatever idea they really come up with throughout this time that they're in this immersive program. So there's a curriculum that has been created for the students while they're there. And my goal was then to be able to create some assessment tools. So just to give a little bit of background of like why I kind of went down this route, full time, I actually work at Towson University. And so a lot of my work here as one of the assistant directors is to look over our learning and development initiatives for our department. I work closely with all of the students here within residence life. And I've also had a background working at a residential high school as well. So a lot of my professional work has really really been with youth involvement and engagement. And then now a lot of my professional work has been around learning and engagement, which kind of led me here to be able to tie all of those interests together with planning, learning, education, and youth all in one area. So this toolkit itself really focuses on how do you look at the learning objectives that were created, how do you look at the focus that's there on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or JEDI, the participant experience overall. So we're engaging youth that are 16 and up. And so how do we make sure that we gauge their interest and their experience while they're in the program? And then lastly, some secondary outcomes. So as we're talking through with some of the program leaders, they have some different ideas on what they want the students to like feel and kind of how they want them to engage, but it's not necessarily a direct learning outcome. And so some of those outcomes are looked to be assessed as well throughout this process. So what and why I chose to kind of focus on assessment as a way to really focus on the middle branch. First of all, one of the things that we heard a lot is that people within the middle branch are kind of tired of the planning process and what that has been like for them over the course of the last couple of years. So people will come in, plan, but they don't really get to see the outcomes of those planning initiatives, right? And so for us, one of the things that I really wanted to do was focus on how can we make sure that students in particular, but members of the community doesn't feel as though this was just another initiative that was done where they get to see these different professionals, from architects to consultants to all of these people coming in, and then a year or two later they don't know exactly what was the point or like how they actually made an impact on their community. So for me, one of the main whys was to be able to hold ourselves accountable as planners to the work that we say we're going to do, so that people can actually see the outcome of that. Also, long term, kind of like I just mentioned, but a little bit more in depth, is the goal is that this assessment tool not only takes care of some of the initiatives now that can be assessed, but also going back and going further, into a couple of years, to be able to see what was the outcome of some of the things that students either proposed, were those things implemented, how are their perspectives now that they've been a part of this immersive experience, and what is now the impact of the community since this has been implemented within the community. Improved metrics overall, I think for me as someone in the professional realm, I'm always looking for feedback, always looking for ways that I can improve my practices. And so this, I think, is really the outcome that they're able to get from this, is being able to really improve some of the efforts and initiatives that they have long term. And then lastly, storytelling. I think kind of along with some of what Maura was saying, I think some of these stories that people have to tell kind of get hidden or brushed away, and we don't really know what it means to be a part of this story. And so I think assessment allows us to do that as well. So my how in this is really to look at the assessment cycle in and of itself and look at how do we go ahead and implement this. So there's this, all of this background information about how do you do assessment, making sure there's something that is results focused. And so for us in this cycle, well, for me in this cycle, I actually come in at point number 3. So they've already established some learning goals. The learning opportunity in and of itself is the curriculum that the students will go through. And so me coming in at assessing student learning is kind of where this toolkit comes into play. And then hopefully, now that I'm no longer a part of the program, they're actually able to use the results long term to be able to share out with the community or be able to make different improvements as stated before. So there were several learning objectives and learning outcomes identified, of which I'm not going to go over, but there are some big goals, from being able to connect students to mentors, to being able to ensure that students are a little bit more aware when it comes to what environmental justice is, what their roles are, and how do we support them being able to be youth advocates in different ways, making sure that they are in make sure they are aware of what the built environment field is like. And so there's all of these learning outcomes that's there. And so when I looked at how broad these goals were, the goal was really to see, are we really going to be able to do all of this, seeing as though the program itself is only about 3 months in and of itself. And so with that, I created a toolkit. And so there's several portions of this toolkit that you will see as I go along. So 3 specific assessment initiatives has been created as a result of this that you will see, and it has all of these different components. And so what you will expect as you're going through the document in and of itself is assessment indicators. So these different bubbles really show us what is it that we're assessing. I kind of went over those things just now. And so whenever you see those indicators or icons above an assessment tool, that is the thing that it's assessing to be able to see. Like we said, that students were able to identify a mentor. Were they able to do that? Yes or no? And so those were those indicators are about. You'll see an assessment worksheet. So I tried my best to be able to really see this as a toolkit where people can just pick it up and go. And one of the things that I was able to do was just identify what's the purpose, what are the instructions, and how will they utilize the information that's there. And then also the format, being able to kind of explain why that format was chosen, what was included in that, and then also like what materials or other things would be needed in order for them to successfully implement that assessment tool. And then lastly, you'll see these little highlighted things just for the purpose of this presentation and for the purpose of explaining it. It kind of, those little bubbles really explains a little bit more in depth, like why that question was chosen, why it was important to include that as a part of this assessment, and kind of looking a little bit more in depth at some of the things that was there so that people know the purpose of those, of that information and data. So one of the first examples that I gave is something that can be used as an assessment tool is the pre-assessment aspect. And one of the things I had to be realistic about is that everybody who's a part of the Middle Branch project has full-time jobs, has all of these competing priorities and all of these things. So the goal is that the implementation part of this assessment wasn't hard, right? So one of the things that I thought about was how do we utilize tools that are already there that can be then used as a form of assessment? And one of those things was the application process that's already used for students to be able to apply to the curriculum or the design lab in and of itself. And so utilizing the questions that's there to really be able to gauge some of the students' ideas of what social justice and equity and inclusion was, what were some of their ideas and hopes for their participation in the program, and then also like why do they think advocacy and being like a youth-led initiative like this was important for their neighborhood and their peers. And so being able to kind of utilize something that was already there to kind of reframe some of the questions or reframe the way in which they thought about utilizing that tool was something that I thought could be an easy way to collect data, an easy way for them to kind of get a benchmarking point for how their students are involved in throughout the time that they're a part of the program. Another thing that was suggested was the midpoint vlog. So I think a lot of times, especially in the work that I do now, we only think of assessment as being able to like fill out a survey or fill out different things, but looking at it differently as well. And so in this, allowing students to be able to have their own creative spin and doing a vlog about their experiences so far, things that they've been able to learn, their perception of their community, the things in which they were newly learning about, some of the things that they are probably still having challenges with exploring, so that they can continue to be challenged throughout the duration of their program there. And so the goal was that students were able to be themselves. They didn't have to do anything like too strenuous in order to kind of put this on, but this is really to be able to get their voices out there, to hear what their perspectives are about their community, some of the ideas that they had in order to solve some of the environmental justice issues that might be present in their community. And then, of course, in order to kind of capture more information, I did suggest one survey for students after they've been able to complete their full 3 months into the program to kind of get a full view of some of the things they were able to experience and some of the things they were able to learn throughout the time that they were there. So I really tried to simplify the process and be able to include this as a last day part of their curriculum day where they're able to provide information and feedback regarding their experience in the program, regarding their ability to learn different items, connect with different people, and really focus on the various items that were suggested in the learning outcomes and objectives, and really saw this as kind of like an overarching point where we can kind of see where students started from the initial application to where they are now. And so there's 3 different sections of it where the 4th section actually goes back to the application questions to be able to use as a benchmark for some of the things in which we were able to really see what their experience has been like since they were a part of the Design Lab while they're there. I was able to identify some limitations, and then also what does it mean to actually evaluate the results in and of itself, which is one of the limitations that was actually there as well. So I think it's one thing to say, oh, it looks good to have a blog, or it looks good to be able to utilize the application that's already in the works. But what does it mean to like categorize that information? Are they putting it in themes? Are they making charts like CJ? Are they doing, how are they actually utilizing this data to be able to say, all right, this is what we were able to hear from our students, and this is the way we're going to utilize it in the future. And some of the limitations that I was able to identify was that, one, some of the learning objectives and goals are actually going to shift a little bit. They're going over through different leadership in the program. And so some of the things or strategies that I've already suggested might not necessarily work for this new iteration of the program. It doesn't necessarily assess student learning in and of itself. So I think that is a portion that I would need to work more closely with some of the program facilitators with to see what portions of the curriculum would make sense to use as an evaluative measure to see about what our students actually learning, since this is one of the primary focuses of the program in and of itself. And then lastly, one of the things that I mentioned was there's a need to probably get more an assessment on like what was the facilitator's experience as well, and like what could be gauged from their experiences, because the goal is that this is not only just a one-stop shop for engaging students, but really something that we're seeing as if this is a best practice, and we know that youth-led engagement is something that we should really focus on as practitioners. How can we continue to refine that to ensure that the way in which we're engaging students and our practices are really helpful and being able to use for the long run. And ultimately, I just challenge people to, if we're saying that we're getting involved into this process of involving our youth and going through this whole immersive experience, making sure that the ideas that they're putting out there, the things in which they're coming up as proposals and stuff, we're taking those to the next level and really advocating on their behalf, so that these things are not only visions, but they're actually things that are being implemented, and they can see those things coming to fruition at the end of the day. And so that's kind of a snapshot of everything that I was working on, and why and how those things can come to life. And so, questions, comments, concerns.
Thank you, April. April, if you could just do a very interesting presentation, and I know there's again, like the others, there's a lot of depth behind it.
Yeah.
We can't exactly enter it all in this 15-minute segment, but just remind us again, just tell us about the program again. What is it? Because you talked about it at the beginning, but then I got lost in the details. What the program is and who administers it and what its goals are.
Perfect. So as a part of the Middle Branch project, they have a specific component for a youth-led engagement initiative, and this is that. And so their goal with this design lab is to create this 3-month immersive experience for students where they're using design thinking strategies in order to identify environmental justice issues within the Middle Branch, and then come up with different ideas in order to resolve those issues on their own. So they can make different proposals, they can create prototypes if they feel as though that would be necessary, and they could identify resources. They can do all of it's really, they can come up with whatever kind of outcome they would like, but the lens is that they're looking at it through a social or environmental justice lens, being as though the Reimagine Middle Branch project is really focused on how do we provide access to the space where a lot of people really don't utilize it much, right? And so how do we open that framework for people to be able to see, like, why is it that they're not using the space, and then coming up with different solutions on how to resolve it.
Thank you. That's a good answer.
Thank you too. Yeah, I had a question too. I found, I think, some of my answers on this page here. So the group of students that would be involved in this program, they're 10 high school students aged 16 or older.
Yes. So the goal is that it's a smaller cohort of students so that they can be able to work a little bit more closely together. Sorry, I'll cut you off.
No, that's fine. And so they would be they're not familiar with design and planning projects. And so they would have this introduction to the process, and then they would be part of the design team. Is that they would be the
Yes.
10 would work in various with various professionals and as just first sort of across the set of collaborators on the project. I see. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So yeah, there will be like a specific facilitator for the program in and of itself, but there will be coordinating different things with different practitioners within the field to be able to come in, do different demonstrations, teach different lessons, so that the students are not only just immersed in this process of design, but also being introduced more broadly to the field of the built environment as well.
And would these students be the 3 months immersion? Is that during the school year for the students, or is that during the summertime, portion of the summertime?
So I think they've looked at it both ways. They looked at actually implemented. So they're still in the process of refining the curriculum right now. But they looked at it both ways for like what could it be for a summer experience and what could it look like for a experience that students are going through the academic year. And during the academic year, it would be doing Saturday classes for a couple hours out of the day.
Thank you, April.
Yeah, no problem.
Other questions or comments for April?
April, I loved as a aspiring landscape architecture student, this is expanding my brain a little bit. But what I appreciate most from it is the accountability. That I like sometimes to think that we're the last people on site, on a construction site. But what you're really proposing is that, what are we even doing?
Mm-hmm.
And especially when we're getting kids involved and the potential versus the risk.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the accountability comes into play. And it's so crucial to think about that going in, making sure that we actually use their feedback so that they don't get lost in the process, so that we don't lose them in the profession, really, because it's a chance to inspire. And that does happen. You know, you feel like, what was that about? The vision, and your graphics. I don't know if that's a part of urban planning either, but it's very clean. I mean, this is a pamphlet. As someone who works in communities and with people, I can use this today. It's your property and everything, but the things that I learned from this, I can apply immediately and with urgency. Now realizing that there's really more on the line. So I commend you, and I'm excited for your future, and thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Just share this.
Any other questions or comments? We could also open it up to a broader, and I won't just make us sit here for the next 27 minutes to fill us up to 5. We can all leave early, but if anyone has a kind of larger overarching comment or area of concern or something they want to share or thought about the middle branch, now would be a great time to share it. I guess it's
I love how different all of our projects were. I thought it was really nice working with y'all and being together over the summer. So I'm glad that we did this.
Yeah, I guess this also brings up this question of, you guys all went out and did these different projects working with different clients or different sponsoring organizations or firms. And I'm wondering, is there some kind of, is there anybody who's coordinating all of this? And will all these experiences have they been documented beyond what we're doing here? And will they be shared with the middle branch constituencies at large, right? Because there's a lot of interesting stuff here. And I know, like, the middle branch is a very complicated, project with all of these different components and stakeholders, and as Moore's presentation showed us, 30 different parks and 19 different neighborhoods and 86 different buried histories, right? So it's confusing, and Morgan State University is doing more stuff with the middle branch, and we're doing a grant funded project at Masonville. And so this is not going to be the end of Morgan involvement, School of Architecture and Planning involvement at the middle branch. But I'm wondering, who's coordinating this? Is this being coordinated by somebody in field operations? Is it being coordinated by somebody? Is it like Brad Rogers at South Baltimore Gateway Partnership? And is there anyone thinking about how all these pieces knit together?
Ooh, the
That is a good
silence.
question. I was looking at my fellows' faces as you ask that, and I think we all were kind of like, that's a question that we have too, in some ways. Yeah, I mean, all of our work is, I guess, actually technically the property of CHAP. Do I have that right? Which I found out like halfway through the fellowship. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of an open question, like what will be done with it and how it will be used. I mean, I think like personally, I kind of was just like, I'm going to try to put as nice a bow on this as possible at the end and like pass it over, I think like if anyone will like use like the physical parts of my work, at least it would probably be Aceto Consulting, since they're doing a lot of the like public outreach part of it. But yeah, I'm not sure what the answer to that is. I don't know.
I think
You guys have a better answer?
No, I don't. I think at the end of the day, we don't really know, right? But I think because we were able to do the independent research and the individual projects, I feel like the individual projects is what really went straight into the immediate efforts that they're doing. But our research, we were able to choose from whatever topic we wanted. So they didn't like give us a box to say, make sure you're focusing on this area, you're focusing on this area. And so that's how you come up with a toolkit versus a visual experience versus, a map, website, Mara, wow, girl. And so you come up with these different outcomes because what we were given was so minimal and how we can execute it. So I think what they directly wanted was what came out of the individual projects that we did. But this research is kind of, we don't really know how it's going to be utilized.
Yeah, and I mean, it was really fantastic to like be given that much latitude in just following and pursuing our interests. And that was really an incredible experience. And just to be like supported and, whatever idea we came up with was really wonderful.
That is an uncommon relationship for either an internship or a fellowship where that you have two tasks, right? That you're working for the firm, but then you also have the opportunity to pursue something of interest, and then be able to share that and get feedback from your professional mentors. So what they created there was really a fascinating model that I hope that we could duplicate down the road in other situations, because clearly all four of you saw the not necessarily just the virtue in that, but it came at a time in your studies where it seems like it was a perfect timing with your studies too, that it allowed you some self-reflection, but also some direction for your last year. So it was a good moment in your curricula.
Yeah, I personally hope that we can do this again this coming summer. I don't know. I haven't reached out to anyone. I don't think Laurel has either, but maybe we can do a 2.0 on this, because it's really gratifying to see this work and to know that the four of you carried this out, beyond the structure of the university and the careful eyes of the faculty, and to see such rich and complex work is really a joy. So I appreciate seeing all four of these projects, and I learned a lot, and I hope you can carry on this work, whether it be at the middle branch or somewhere far away, continue the good work. So thank you.
I have a quick question for Andrew. And you prefaced your presentation saying that you hadn't expected to be presenting it that way, and you kind of envisioned this to be a small booklet that you kind of like fidget with. I love the word fidget. And I'm wondering if you're planning on maybe creating that, like taking it and actually getting it published. I mean, you can do all these self-publishing things with Blurber, and pick the different papers, or maybe you print it out yourself on different, because I think the one thing that I kind of want is like to feel it. I want it to be on paper that has like texture and tactileness to it, not like just glossiness, but because your drawings had so much, even though they're line, pen, and watercolor drawings, they had so much kind of depth to them. So I'm curious to know what you're thinking.
Yeah, the way that we presented our projects was just round table. So we all set up little booths and presented, and I made a bunch of printouts, different scales, made little booklets. And really it was just them touching it and going through it and me talking to them. So I wanted it to be kind of a tool to start a conversation, because I think that none of the pages or images really capture everything that I was thinking about and everything that someone else can think about. So it's really just like the catalyst of a conversation face to face. So yeah, never meant to be digital and in our face like this. Yeah,
it's like a wonderful little document, because I can imagine like going front to back to front, just opening up random, and it's like something that you kind of have at your bedside table all the time, and it doesn't really necessarily need to apply to middle branch. I mean, it does, obviously it's very personal and very specific to that, but you have so many different thoughts in there about space. And I thought one of the things that you said, and I know we're going over, but was that now all people have an understanding of space and survey, just that 6 foot measurement. And it's so true. Like, most people every day like have no idea what 6 feet is, but everyone now really knows that 6 feet is like 2 arms, and so it's this kind of new spatial understanding and appreciation that you brought to light.
I just want to add feedback as a professional planner that's been to that enjoys going to a lot of these presentations. I think that the four of you have done some of the best student presentations I've seen. And I could think of lessons that I can apply from each one of your presentations in my work as a small town planner. And it was just a great joy to see all four of you, and hope that you continue this great work.
Okay, so I think that's a wrap. Kyle, I think we can turn the video off.